Are current Bible translations legitimate or illegitimate? Today, we're taking a listener's question about that and how it relates to Romans 1 and Leviticus 18. Welcome to the To Be the Church podcast, where we explore what it looks like to truly be the church in today's culture. I'm Tyler. Andrew's here. Ben is not here. So let's talk about Ben for a minute.
Nice.
What is your favorite thing about Ben Potloff?
Oh, dude. Ben is very earthy. I like Ben's earthiness.
Explain that.
I think like he's just a down to earth guy, man.
Okay.
He's just a regular dude. He's just, Potloffian. Potloffian, which is the German for, actually it's the Russian for earthy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What about you? What's your favorite thing about Benjamin?
Probably his availability. He wants to hang out all the time.
Except for when we're doing the To Be the Church
Apparently,
podcast?
yes. Yeah. We live in the same neighborhood, so
yeah.
we hang, like he texts me at like 11 o'clock at night. He's like, you want to come over? I'm like, okay. So, no, I think honestly, probably his authenticity, a very overused term.
It is overused. I don't even know what that means anymore.
Exactly. But like just a very, real person, earthy, if you will.
The dude's earthy, man. There's no getting around it.
He is one of the assistant coaches on my son's flag football team. And I don't know, just watching him interact with the 6 and 7 year olds is I don't know, it's a good picture of him. It's great. He will text me after a bad game and be like, I think I should probably not be the defensive coordinator anymore. But
I bet that's pretty demoralizing when your 6 and 7 year olds get,
Yeah. All right, let's tackle a question here. This one came in this past week. All right, let's go. Hey guys, I've been coming across rhetoric online about the illegitimacy of the current translation of the Bible, specifically in the context of condemning homosexuality. The stance is that the original biblical text has been altered over centuries to fit the church agenda, and verses such as Leviticus 18:22 and Romans 1:26 and 27 actually condemn same-sex pedophilia. You shall not lie with a male child as with a woman. It is abomination. There's a blog site called Queer Bible Hermeneutics, and it breaks down all the verses that condemn homosexuality and essentially, in quotes here, proves that the translation is illegitimate or misleading. I've had conversations with Christians who make these claims, and I don't have enough knowledge to have any input or counter. What is your guys' response to this camp? What should I say to a Christian who has these beliefs? And is it necessary to say anything at all? Thanks.
So common thing that people are running into today, obviously. I think we should start on maybe, should I say anything at all?
Okay.
Why don't we start there? So, what do you think on that, Tyler? Should the person say anything at all?
Yeah, I think so. There's two spots here. One, it says I've been coming across rhetoric online about the illegitimacy of this. I'd say if that's where your interactions are happening, then maybe not. Like if I don't see the point in keyboarding, your way to through an argument. But in the second paragraph, I've had conversations with Christians who make these claims. And so if these are people that you know and that you know well and you care for them, then I think yes, absolutely. You should have these conversations. My wife and I have even had, had to wrestle through, should we talk about this stuff to family members who hold these beliefs, and what's our role there? And I think that if the relationship is there, then the conversations probably should be too.
100%. Yep, I think that's a good way to put it. So this is I'll mention a couple different resources. So this is the question's got rhetoric that's online about the illegitimacy of current translation of the Bible. So the idea being that the church changed this over the years to fit a specific agenda. So the arguments, I usually refer to it as the revisionist argument. A couple of sources to look to. Probably the book length. The book length treatment of this from the queer hermeneutic, and that's the term the person used here, the queer hermeneutic.
It looks like that's the blog.
Yeah, queer title, Bible hermeneutics. And you can find, this stuff's been around for a few decades, and 60s and 70s is probably the beginning of it, but you're going to go back 20, 30, 40 years to find this. You're finding a lot more of it now in terms of the accessibility of it and obviously the internet. And so these arguments have been there. The longest treatment of it that I've ever read was Matthew Vines wrote the book God and the Gay Christian, probably came out about 12, 13, 14 years ago. And he has a whole book-length treatment of this from his standpoint, which I would put in the queer hermeneutic world. He was like a student at Harvard, and he dropped out, and then he went back to his hometown and began researching and then writing on this. And he's not like the founder of this in any sense. There's a whole like third way group that developed out of him. I haven't really tracked him in a few years, but he was I read that book years ago, like when it came out, and there's a lot of responses to it that were written that were very good. Keller wrote a pretty extensive one, I remember. But the best short, informative, book length treatment that you can have as a Christian to like actually get equipped to combat these arguments with truth and facts and logic would be Kevin DeYoung's short book, What Does the Bible Really Teach About Homosexuality? There's a lot of good resources out there now developing in these areas, but What Does the Bible Really Teach About Homosexuality by Kevin DeYoung is the best I've ever read on this in terms of taking the exegetical stuff. You mentioned Leviticus 18, Romans 1, those kind of things. Vines argues that and the queer hermeneutic argues that the Bible doesn't teach that homosexuality is wrong, but that it's effectively what's called pederasty or pedophilia type of a situation, that it's a power dynamic and all these kinds of things. And it's the interesting thing about Vines is that he presents these arguments, and you're going to find this in all of the treatment of this in the queer hermeneutic world. They present these arguments, and they don't have any knowledge of either textual criticism, which would be the textual criticism is the discipline, kind of the science of figuring out the original text of Scripture, right? And like comparing manuscripts and seeing all those things. So the idea that the church would have changed something, or that modern translations and the Greek and Hebrew text that those translations are working from are somehow corrupted, or the church, that would be an issue of textual criticism. Those who do this queer hermeneutic thing have no knowledge of text criticism, and it shows in their writing, and they have no knowledge. Many of them, Vines says it in his book. He's like, I don't know anything about the original languages, but here's and so it's a mess. The hermeneutic is I wouldn't even say it's written in sand. I mean, that'd probably be a generous way to say it, but like it's written in sand in the sense of like, you imagine them writing that hermeneutic in the sand, and then the waves just come and wash it away. It's very, very surfacey and based on really, really bad, like not a super precise word, really, really fallacious understandings of the biblical text criticism, the biblical languages. And so, and to think that like, it just as you think of the issue,
that's Matthew Vines on the line right now.
Oh yeah. Hey, Matt. Thanks for calling. Long-time listener, first-time caller. So what is you guys' response to this camp? That would be my response to it. It's a mess in the sense of the exegesis, the treatment of Scripture. It's trying to revise what the Scriptures say in order to allow for something the Scriptures clearly condemn, like homosexual practice, and allow for that to be something that the Scriptures don't condemn, so that people can practice homosexuality while also claiming to be Christians or holding to that. And 2 Corinthians or 1 Corinthians 6, talking about those who won't inherit the kingdom of heaven, and mentions men who practice homosexuality in that. and talks about, for such were some of you. You know, Romans 1 is probably the best place in Scripture where that is treated. And in Romans 1, the big thing there is talking about that these are unnatural relations, that these are not the way that God created sexuality to function, and that because of the depravity of mankind and because of the wrath of God being poured out upon those who deny him, they're given over and they give themselves over to these unnatural relations, men and women. And like, I don't even think, do we really need, I mean, sure, as Christians, like, you know, if you're arguing with other people who are claiming to be Christians, then the Bible's fair game. The argument there is like text criticism, the biblical languages, and DeYoung and others like that will equip you really well with understanding those arguments and being able to speak to them very clearly. But if you're not even taking the Bible into it, this, like, yeah, homosexuality in the unnatural aspect to it is something that is clear logically just through natural law, through the way that sexuality works, through the way that our sexual organs are created, and the perpetuation of the species through the, I'm not trying to get too graphic here, but like through the like recreative process, the like where babies come from. So like Romans 1 speaking to it as unnatural is physiologically true. Like this is not the way our bodies are created to function. This isn't good for our bodies to function in that way sexually. And so like that's an argument more from natural law or more from physiology than it is from the Scriptures, and I think we can utilize both of those arguments. But the idea that the church has this agenda that goes back thousands of years or hundreds of years or whatever it is, to twist the Bible in such a way to do what? To destroy people and hurt people. Like the whole thing is from this power dynamics kind of, you know, spirit of the age type of thing that we see in our culture today, where it's like the Scriptures lead us to the revelation of God, which is given to us for the sake of human flourishing. And so what this Bible prescribes in terms of sexuality and teaches us in terms of sexuality is made for us to thrive as human beings the way that God has created us. And this argument breaks down on so many levels, this queer hermeneutic as it relates to that. So Leviticus 18 and Romans 1 are only two of the places. There's so many different places that DeYoung and others go to in Scripture. And Vines does as well. He goes to those places and then gyrates in it to try to figure out how to present them in a way that would allow a person to say, no, I am a practicing Christian and a practicing homosexual, and that's cool with the Lord, you know? And that it's not there. But that's where he has said, Vine says in his book, like, you can either be a Christian or you can be a homosexual, but here's a third way, right? And his third way is that no, you can do both of those things. So, which the Scriptures condemn. But anyway, yeah.
Okay, let's take it out of this specific topic and just go to the first sentence of this question. Yeah. Like, what would you say to someone who's like, I question the legitimacy of current translations of the Bible? As somebody who has studied the original languages for what, 20 years?
20 years, ish.
Yeah. So what would you say, like, or what, like, let's even just make it a non-negative. Like somebody comes to you and is like, hey, do you think we can really trust the current translations of the Bible?
Yeah. Yeah. What we're able to do, or yes, you can trust the translations of the Bible. What we're capable of doing now, and we, as in terms of like what scholars are capable, and I'm not putting myself in that camp, but like what scholars are capable of doing now with technology and with the internet, and the amount of work on the text and with the text and the way, you know, through technology that things can be cross-referenced and everything else as it relates to translation. And with all that stuff, you know, the manuscripts that we have access to of the Old and New Testament, copies of the Old and New Testament manuscripts, like what we have access to and how those are being able to be synthesized and understood, and even discoveries in the last 100 years, like the Dead Sea Scrolls and other things, and how all that stuff gets digitized and then it all gets cross-referenced through stuff. The translations that we have now are as accurate as anything that has been available in the history of the world, outside of course, the original autographs. but I'm just saying it's there. These are very accurate translations, and they're not all translations, or some or paraphrases are the same. We've done tons of podcasts on that over the years, but there's more like paraphrases of the Bible. There's dynamic equivalents, kind of thought for thought, and then there's word for word translations. And those are a little bit different, you know, but in terms of how tightly they hold to the text, and there's an argument to be made for, like, well, dynamic equivalent and kind of translating idioms into an idiom in English is more gives you the sense of it than you would get if you were doing a real wooden kind of word for word translation or whatever else. But and so people can argue about that translation stuff. But all this to say, these are very, very, very accurate. You have if you speak English, like, you have an accurate and oodles of accurate translations of the Bible that you have access to, and then there's tons of tools out there for people who haven't even studied the biblical languages to learn those things, and ton of that stuff. So maybe I'd plug that real quick. Biblical Training, I think this is the site. Biblicaltraining.org is a site. Is that it? Yeah. Biblicaltraining.org. Oh, the first video I see on there is Why We Believe the Bible, a 5-lesson thing by John Piper. Miles Van Pelt, big OT scholars on there. So this is out of Bruce Ware, Daniel Block, Daniel Wallace. I mean, these guys are brilliant guys. And biblicaltraining.org would be a place to go. And I think Mounts out of Washougal has put a bunch of stuff together on here. And that's a place where you can find a ton of good stuff, kind of college level stuff, and, you know, Blomberg and Darrell Bach and you know, a bunch of Western Seminary guys, Dwayne Garrett, who I studied under at Gordon Conwell. Like, you scroll through that and you can get some serious seminary level resources, classes, stuff like that from that biblicaltraining.org. Maybe we throw that in the
You'll throw in the show notes. Another thing we'll put in the show notes is Thomas Nelson came out with a 1-page translation chart where it takes all the major translations and it talks about their philosophy, their distinctive, and then it actually gives an example of it uses 1 Corinthians 13:4 and 5, and like says, like, this is how this translation specifically words that. But it talks, you know, like the CSB, which is a bit of a newer one. It says blending transparency to the original documents with accessibility for the contemporary audience, and things like that. So you can go through, like, okay, the Bible translations that I have, how did they get there? Stuff like that. So we'll put all that stuff in the show notes. But yeah, thanks for this question. If you have more, we'd love to hear from you. Podcast at toBeTheChurch.com. You can do it on social media or in the YouTube comments as well, at To Be The Church. And we'll see you next Friday.